Hello, everybody. You're listening to Angelneers, the podcast. Angelneers is a Silicon Valley community for startup builders where founders and operators share their firsthand knowledge on how to build and scale startups. I'm your host, Oleg Kujikov, and our guest today is Ashish Bhatia, a technical leader with diverse experience in building software. He currently holds technically advisory roles at 5 startups. He's an investor with over 40 startups and 9 exits to this point. Ashish has worked as a software engineer in Celo, which is in cryptocurrencies. He's also worked at Facebook and WhatsApp, and as a founding engineer on Google's Android app scanning product, Google Bouncer. Today, we're talking with Ashish about his journey working inside big companies, big tech companies, and then transitioning his work to more startup-sized companies. But before we get into that, Ashish, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Oleg. Thanks for the great introduction. I couldn't have introduced myself better.
We're excited to have you here. So let's get started here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in technology.
I would say I always enjoyed writing code, building things, even during my college days. So it was pretty clear to me that this is sort of an area I'm going to pursue. This is sort of an area I'm going to stay in. And somehow the stars aligned, things worked out. I was able to get roles that I want, and I was able to enter technology industry at the right time, or when the growth was just happening around 2010, just when I graduated.
Can you take us back to that time? So you graduated in 2010. What did you do after that?
Oh yeah, so back in 2008, I had internship at Google. And I would say that was probably the biggest game changer thing in my life. Because of that internship, I was able to come back in 2010 and get a full-time role at Google, and that's how my journey continued. It's funny if you think about the timing aspect. I graduated in 2010. If instead I graduated a year earlier in 2009, most of the tech companies, including Google, had a job freeze at that time. So my career trajectory might have been very different. Maybe better, maybe worse. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? You could have gone on to start a company or maybe never get that job. But tell us more about your specific area of expertise in tech. Where do you like to focus?
I would say, in general, in tech, I like building things. And I would say what I'm building, that varies. And in that sense, my interests have evolved over time. There is always a desire to learn something new in me. And that has kept me pushing from one area to another area. There is another set of individuals in tech who also like building things, but they instead prefer to build an expertise in one particular area. Like you would come across an engineer who has been working in say ad tech for say 15-20 years. That's not my persona. My persona is more of someone who prefers going more broad. So in terms of, and that's what I count as my expertise, being able to build a diverse set of things, be it backends, be it frontends, be it mobile apps, be it dApps on cryptocurrency platforms. I'm relatively pretty fluent in most of them, but I wouldn't count myself as an expert in either of them. I think that's the trade-off you take when you go broad. You have to sacrifice the knowledge that you can gain in a particular area.
Yeah, well, clearly, you are well suited to your area of expertise. You've done pretty well, and you've gotten hired and rehired at these great companies. So, according to your LinkedIn, after a couple of internships and stints in academia, you joined Google as a software engineer. Can you just tell us about how you got hired at Google?
Oh yeah, I think it was a standard interview process at that time, somewhat simplified because I had a prior internship. One interesting thing was I did have to, at that time I was in India, so I did have to get a visa and fly here for one single day of on-site interviews back in early 2010.
What kind of interesting projects were you working on over there?
So at Google, I think I see I ended up being lucky. I ended up being part of a 3-person team, which was just being formed as the 3 of us joined. to build a new pipeline for scanning Android apps before they are published to Google Play. And this was a new team being formed in Google at that time. The issue was being noticed that Google is hosting all these apps in Google Play Store. It was called Android Market at that time, and these apps could damage the user. So one, there is an obvious harm to the user, and second, there is an obvious issue of negative PR or the negative impact it will have on Google. So in that sense, I think we ended up being really lucky that three of us get to experience building a complete pipeline from scratch for processing hundreds and thousands of applications that were published every day into Google Play. And we built like a full-fledged dynamic and a static analysis system to detect and catch a lot of bad stuff there. I would say it was 20% maybe Android specific, but 80% just building generic backend pipelines, big pipelines. It was a great stepping stone into my career.
I know people are so interested in Google and any stories that come out of that. Can you talk about maybe some of the challenging parts of working there? Was it the work? Was it anything? What was challenging about it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Yeah, so I would say Google definitely has some of the smartest people on the planet, some of the smartest engineers on the planet. No questions on that. Working there is definitely, you're challenged every day by what can be done and how can you keep up with everyone. It's an interesting battle. It's an interesting challenge to be fighting. And at the same time, from more of an engineering perspective, I would say scale is a huge challenge. Any product that Google launches. So I was not involved in any consumer-facing product, but even with my friends who were involved in consumer-facing products, as soon as the first TechCrunch article goes out, 1 million or 5 million users would log in immediately on the same day and will use the product. So in Google's case, you have to build from scratch. You have to build for scale almost immediately. You cannot have a slow growth path, slowly climbing 10, 20% week over week or month over month, which many startups have a luxury of in the Bay Area.
So how many years were you at Google and when did you decide to leave?
About 3 years. Once I realized that I had my major chunk of learning that I wanted to gain. I wanted to experience the startup culture in Bay Area. That's what this area is known for. Less so at that time than 10 years later. But even at that time, I started looking around. I looked at other bigger companies, other established companies of 100, 200, 500 employees. I looked at smaller companies, and then once I found that I feel like there's a match, I decided to jump in.
And where was that? Where'd you find that match?
Oh yeah, there was Morta Security. So it was in the same security space. I continued my career as software engineer and security, leaving Google, joining Morta Security in 2013.
After that, you went to work for WhatsApp. Can you talk about your experience there, and do you remember any interesting turning points?
Yeah, I think that was a huge context switch in a very interesting way. So at both Google and Morta Security, I was building products meant to be used by other engineers. So there is a higher demand for building, a product which has sufficient features that your users are asking for. But there is, I would say, much less focus on usability issues or user experience issues. Compared to that, WhatsApp was building, as we used to say, grandmother in Brazil. So that's what co-founders used to say, and I used to love this phrase that there's a grandmother in Brazil. She's using WhatsApp. She doesn't know what a server is. She doesn't know what a host name is. And the only thing she wants to do is send text messages, send photos, record videos, and communicate with her family members. So the specification, the way you build the product changes drastically. And at the same time, I made another jump till now at Morta as well as Google. I was a backend engineer, and now I jumped fully into mobile, focusing on Android. And that was a huge context switch to building a product that runs on a device you don't control versus building back-end server that you are in full control of. So the challenges change completely.
That's really interesting and a funny kind of use case of user-driven design building for the grandmother in Brazil. I love that. Ashish, you mentioned, working at Google for 3 years and wanting to experience the startup world after that. What kind of lessons did you take from Google that you carried over to the next stage, like WhatsApp?
I would say good engineering practices. Google has great engineering practices of how you go about writing code, how you go about structuring code, and how you go about maintaining the code in the long run. And I think that's every engineer who gets a chance to work at Google should try to absorb those skills and take them elsewhere. Many friends of mine who joined Google much later in their life after leaving other big companies also commented on how great the engineering practices are at Google.
And is it easy to bring those over to the startup world, or is it challenging?
I guess it depends. So some of these things are, I would say, individual things, but some of these things involve a team level initiative. So you can't really change things that involve a team as easily as you can, change things. Those can be changed by an individual. So you need some amount of, influence and people capital in those kind of cases to bring in those changes.
Tell me about some of the biggest technical challenges that you had to address while at WhatsApp.
I would say a very different kind of a scale. In contrasting with my Google days, where we were trying to see how efficiently can we process these apps as quickly as possible. All these app updates, those were coming in daily as quickly as possible, and decide whether these apps are malicious or not. Compared to that, here the biggest challenge was scale and fragmentation of devices. So wide and varied set of devices with wide and varied set of bugs that are being triggered because some undocumented aspect or even a documented aspect of Android API has been implemented incorrectly by a Chinese vendor, which is suddenly very popular in some part of, say, Africa, and we are seeing a lot of crashes or bugs related to that. So these were the kind of issues that our goal was to make the app as robust as possible on all possible devices.
And then after WhatsApp, you went to work for a company called Cello, a blockchain company. Can you tell us what they do and what you worked on there?
In the case of Cello, my goal was, I was reading and learning, educating myself in the field of cryptocurrencies, even while I was working at WhatsApp and Facebook. But then I wanted to jump in and educate myself and do hands-on work related to cryptocurrencies. So that's exactly what I got a chance to do at Cello. Cello, like most major blockchains, is the fork of Ethereum. So we did lots of major modifications. I got a chance to modify and make major improvements to the Ethereum code base, or more precisely, our fork of the Ethereum code base, to do the kind of things that Ethereum didn't support at that time, and we wanted to implement to make Cello a superior product.
So, at this point, we've talked about, 3 different companies, all kind of Rocketships that you've worked at, all doing amazing things. What would you say your biggest accomplishment was while working at those Rocketships?
I would say getting things done is almost always the biggest accomplishment, for in any of these cases. Learning is great, but companies don't reward you for learning. They want to reward you for what you offer. And at the same time, in all of these cases, my goal was always to be, as much as possible, to be a team player, to, help the team members succeed, to bring in better engineering practices, to bring in better tactics that we can do to improve the productivity of the team. So I think, broadly speaking, when I think of my accomplishment, I think enabling my team members to be more productive is something which I feel proud of in all the cases.
How about what was the biggest setback or challenge you faced, and how did you handle that?
Oh yeah, I think I would say every time there's a mindset shift that's involved. So even jumping from Google to Malta, there was a mindset shift that was required. That suddenly, in case of Google, a lot of decisions. Okay, which libraries to use? How would you store data? How would you access data? How would you deploy your code? All of these things were, very standard, set in stone, which were which were completely unnegotiable. Which were non-negotiable. You cannot negotiate them. So, and this simplifies your life a lot because now you're only trying to figure out how to do something, and there are no alternatives. Then you jump to a small startup, a 10-person startup, and suddenly all this decision making is your responsibility. You're trying to deliver something, and there's a vague specification. But beyond that, how do you store data? How do you access data? How do you deploy? How do you maintain redundancy? Uh, all those things are, up in the air. And I would say the open source stack has improved a lot. But back in 2013, 2015, the open source stack was pretty inferior compared to Google. Now, jumping into Cello, there was another setback or another challenge, which was getting or understanding this idea that I don't have full control of the context or the surroundings in which the app is running in. So suddenly, the code I'm writing has to be designed to be way more robust. And even if I make a bug, I cannot deliver the fix immediately to the end users because I will have to commit a fix, and then eventually Google would take its own sweet time to finally release the app in a day or two, and then users would install it in another few days. And in all those time frames, the bug could be bothering the user. So suddenly the bar for code quality goes up drastically in those cases.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing. Let's switch gears and start talking about your work with startups. Currently, you're on the advisory board for several startups. What were your main goals when you first got started working with startups?
I never had this plan to join startups as an advisor. I was not initially actively seeking that kind of a role to begin with, but surprisingly, it just happened that I was just helping a friend of mine ideate through, some decisions on the technical side. He was a non-technical person, but he had a co-founder, technical co-founder who was less experienced, and I ended up being sort of a sounding board for him. And this was all informal. Then one day, this friend realized that, okay, we are taking so much of your help. I think let's formalize the relationship. And he decided to give me advisory equity, and that's how the relationship or my first advisory engagement started. And that led to more reach outs in the future. And before I could realize, I ended up on multiple startup advisory boards.
Can you talk more about how the process here works as far as being brought in, I guess? Is it driven more by the founders or their investors? Just uncover this for me.
I think it should always be driven by founders. It can be initiated by investors. In fact, in some of the cases that I work with, or I'm sort of in informally touch with multiple VCs in the very two of my advisory opportunities happened because the VCs decided to make those introductions where they said where they felt that this could be useful for the founders. But I think in all the cases, even if someone else initiates it, the founders should take the initiative forward and then decide that is this the right engagement or not. And I tell the founders explicitly that you need to have a very clear view of why you want to bring in an advisor, not just me, but even any other advisor, that what exactly are you looking from that person. And if you don't have that clear vision, don't get an advisor just yet.
Okay, so these days, do these kind of opportunities come your way? Are they inbound, or do you source them?
It has always been inbound for me. I have never sourced these opportunities. I think that I don't think that works unless, you are sort of like trying to establish a consulting firm or something. Then I think there might be a sort of a setup that can work, but that has never been my preference.
And then follow-up question, is there typically like a dating period prior to you joining as an advisor, or is it more of a shotgun wedding?
Oh yeah, it's there's always a dating period. I would say after having an initial conversation, I always request one meeting where I say, okay, now let's do one meeting as if I have already signed up as an advisor, and after that meeting, you should be able to evaluate if I am adding sufficient value or not, and I should be able to evaluate that is this the place where I can add some value or not. So I mean, I'm a technical person. Okay, if a startup is looking for an advisor who can help them with sales or go-to marketing strategy, I don't think I'm the best person to take an advice from. But sometimes I've gotten surprisingly those kind of reach outs as well, where I have to politely decline those reach outs as soon as I sense that this relationship wouldn't succeed.
How well structured are these advisory engagements typically? I know you mentioned signing a contract for the first one. Is that something you do for all of these, or can they be more informal?
No, I always keep it with contract, and I think it just keeps things more professional. So you are paying me, and that's why you expect something out of me. And having that expectation written in the form of a contract, that are you expecting a meeting every quarter? Are you expecting a meeting every month? It's usually good to have that. And similarly, having compensation ensures that founder thinks too. It's very easy to not value when you get a free advice, but when you're getting a paid advice, you pay more heed to it.
Makes sense. So, having done this for a few years, what surprised you the most about being in an advisory role?
Yeah, I think in many cases, the founders actually know what they want to do, and they are mostly looking for sort of a sounding board. So I sort of act as a sounding board for the CTO and the product team, and I let them just bounce their ideas off of me. I would say I don't try to take an active role trying to make technology decisions for them, but whatever decisions they are taking, I help them think through whether this decision is good or bad. And surprisingly, just having that conversation usually prevents long-term mistakes. And I'm surprised that more startup founders don't go for an advisor early on.
How much time are you typically spending like with a startup? Tell me more about like the expectation there for both sides.
I would say it's 1 to 2 hours a month per startup, amortized. So it's important to know that there are startups. They don't talk to me for 3 months, and then suddenly they schedule 3 architecture discussion meetings over the next 1 week. And then there are startups with whom I have a setup that a calendar meeting is set up for every second week for next 1 year.
What are some of the most challenging parts of working with startups as an advisor?
I think one challenging part is definitely the communication and the context piece. So when you have a full-time employee, that person is involved day in and day out in your company. So that person has the full context. While, if you're talking to an advisor, and I'm not just saying technical advisor, any advisor, be it a sales advisor or be it a marketing advisor, you're talking to that person, let's say once every 15 days. Now, in 15 days, some things might have happened which were critical, which were important to the discussion going forward, but that advisor might be totally unaware of those things. So I would say to have a good relation, a founder needs to, keep a good communication where they are able to bring an advisor up to speed in terms of, okay, this is what happened in my company, in my startup in past 15 days, in past 30 days since we had the conversation. These are the important things that have changed so that the advice is tailored accordingly.
So we all know, listening to this podcast, that, a startup is a fragile thing. Most don't succeed. In your eyes, what do you think has the most potential to go wrong in the first year of a startup when it's sort of in this early stage?
First year or the 0th year?
The 0th, yeah. 0 to 1.
Okay. So surprisingly, even before most startups get a chance to hit on the front page of Product Hunt or Tech Hunt, They die because there is a founder fight. Surprisingly, even in Y Combinator, in every batch, if you ask uh, someone from someone who's inside the batch, they will tell you that at least a few startups end up failing because the founders go to the YC partner and say, "We don't like each other. We don't want to work with each other." And then the partners say, "Okay, yeah, it's fine. Just let's just end the relationship. There's no point if you two can't stand each other. There's no point continuing working on the startup." So that's one thing that happens in sort of the zeroth year. Usually before the funding phase. Sometimes it happens after the funding phase, and then more of a public fight that happens. And in the first year, I would say the bigger issue that happens is getting the product market fit right. I think nailing that is hard. I wouldn't be able to say I have a proper fix for it or solution for it, but finding a nice market for the product you're thinking or building the right product for the market you have in mind, getting that PMF right, I think is the biggest challenge most startups face.
Yeah. Well, okay. Two very thoughtful answers from someone who definitely has the experience. All right. Next, is there any specific advice that you've been giving to founders that you'd maybe like to highlight?
Yeah, I would say a generic advice I give to founders, which is that you're making a lot of decisions without having the full information, and that's just the hard reality of the situation. You have to, but in those cases, try to see if the decision has a long-term consequence or a short-term consequence. So, what market you are choosing, what market you're going after, has a long-term consequence. On the tech side, what database you're using. It's hard to switch from one database technology to another after a year or so. What cloud platforms you're using, what language you're using to write your code in. These are all long-term decisions, and I recommend startup founders that they really deliberate through these decisions, and if possible, find someone to validate their ideas before taking strong decisions in these cases. The other set of decisions are more reversible. So in those kind of decisions, it's best just to move as fast as possible and figure out within a week or two whether you made the right decision or the wrong decision, and then just course correct at that point. It's usually much cheaper rather than trying to deliberate too much of those.
Do you think founders are happy with your work? I know you can't read minds, but yeah, what do you think?
Yes, I think it's hard to answer. I think it's usually easier for an employee to figure out whether their team is happy with their work or not. It's a bit harder for an advisor to figure that out. But I mean, no one has fired me yet, so I presume they're happy with me.
Let's talk about investing in startups. You're also active as an angel investor. How long has that been going on?
I would say on and off since about 2014, 8 years, but it's not like I've been fully focused on trying to figure out investing. I've been looking into the space more like an on and off person.
What kind of startups do you find particularly interesting?
I would say startups that are very heavy in terms of, usually in terms of software. So I think there are areas that I don't fully understand. I think pharmaceutical is a great industry, trying to figure out new drugs or aging technologies or cancer research. I think it's a great area, but that's not something which I understand. So a startup founder can come and tell me anything, and I have no way of questioning whether what they're saying is possible or not, or how big the market is going to be for this. So I stay away from those kind of areas that I don't understand, and I prefer to focus more towards software-heavy startups where the core piece is software.
How do you source investment opportunities?
Yeah, that ends up being, I think, complicated and random. I would say everyone has their own ad hoc deal flow in multiple ways. There's always a lot of reach out that is happening over LinkedIn. Then I have VC friends. So in some cases, they allow me to. So they are investing in a seed round, and they allow me to come in as a value-add investor along with them. Then there are multiple angel groups I'm part of where the deals get discussed, and I help them the due diligence side, tech diligence side of things. And in lieu of doing the due diligence, I get a chance to invest in those deals. So that has been my sourcing strategy.
And are there any interesting startups that you've invested in so far that you might want to share?
Oh yeah, I do. Okay, yeah. If you want to give me a chance to advertise, yeah, sure, why not? I would say Nalmi is a great one. What they are doing is that they are trying to standardize the banking infrastructure as a white label service. So they are based out of East Coast, and I had a call with the founder, and I was impressed. The two co-founders actually were running one of the largest student-run credit unions while studying at Georgia Tech, and then uh, I looked at the numbers. I was impressed. I looked at what they have built and decided to invest. And they have been growing strong. They have raised further rounds, so I'm happy.
How actively are you engaged with your portfolio companies typically?
I would say as active as they want me to be, or as passive as they want me to be. There have been cases where I've done technical interviews for engineering candidates for my portfolio companies, and then there are cases where the founders just don't want to engage beyond like sending a quarterly update. And I mean, I respect that. I think it's a founder's decision. As you know, I cut small checks, so I think I don't have a right to decide, or I don't have a right to dictate a lot of these terms to the founders.
What would you say the hardest part is about being an angel investor? And then after hardest part, what's the most rewarding?
I think the hard part is trying to, not just be right, but not be, out of fashion with the market. Let me explain that. For example, if there's a big VC, they invest in a startup, and then suddenly that particular field goes out of fashion, but they really believe in that startup, and that startup needs another 2-3 years of runway to survive. That VC can come in and pump in maybe next round of money. They can support the startup through the bad phases. An angel investor doesn't really have that capability. When you cut a $25,000 check or a $50,000 check, and if the startup is based out of any of the high cost of living areas like New York, San Francisco area, or Los Angeles, you really don't have an ability to help them further with another check. If you see a potential, but they need like another 6 or 12 months of runway to achieve that potential. So that's the hard part of being an angel investor.
And then how about most rewarding?
I think the rewarding part is getting a chance to see a company being built from scratch, from a two-founder kind of a setup, putting money in there, to them reaching a stage where they are raising money from an institutional investor, and they have grown up enough at that point that those investors are joining their fold. I think that I feel is pretty rewarding for me.
Let's talk about your blog next. In addition to working with and investing in startups, you run your own blog. Talk about why that's important to you. What's it about?
Oh yeah, I've been running my blog since about 2010. About the time I was about to graduate, I decided that I will maintain a public blog. And I actually used to maintain a blog inside my college too, so it wasn't very different of a setting for me, just that the domain changed. And for me, I think just writing down my thoughts, just sharing what I wanted to say under my persona uh, is sort of something which I enjoy. So that's how I maintain that public presence. And surprisingly, that public presence helps in many cases when I'm having conversation with a startup founder, or with in any other professional context. In many cases, those individuals have already seen my blog. Those individuals have already read some of my, say, technical blog posts, and it as an ancillary effect, it casts off a good impression on them.
There's several parts to your blog. Which part is your favorite?
It's It's interesting. I would say if you would have asked me that what my favorite would have been before looking at analytics, I would have said travel. But when I look at analytics, my favorite part ends up being book summaries. It's funny that travel is such a contested space. There are so many bloggers who write about their travel journeys that my blog almost never shows up on like Google search results or something in terms of if you're searching for anything travel related. Even if I've written a really good, at least in my opinion, a really good blog post about that particular place. But surprisingly, not many people blog about book summaries. So some of my blog posts are used as reading materials in many colleges in the United States. So those book summaries are being read, and I feel really happy about that.
Let's move to the close and kind of ask some big picture questions. What's one thing about your journey and experience that you're most proud of looking back, from this point?
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, I'm happy being part of multiple of these startups, multiple of I would say less startup in Google's case. It's not a startup; it's multiple of these products where I get a chance to build things from scratch, where I was able to deliver a value to the society that that makes me feel satisfied, and it was a rewarding experience.
And looking back, is there anything you might have done differently?
Oh wow, yeah, I think that's hindsight is always 2020, right? Right from to 2010, I should have put 100% of my after tax income into Bitcoin, right?
Let me ask it a different way. Would you give any advice to your 20-year-old self?
I would say just having an even stronger focus would have helped. I think there were occasions I feel I got distracted and missed out on certain opportunities, especially in terms of angel investments, where I think in the hindsight I regret because something else was going in my life and they distracted me.
Do you have any future plans?
Broadly speaking, I see myself as a builder. I write code even these days, working on some of my side projects, and I think even in the near future, I see myself building things.
Well, we are going to end it there. If you liked our show, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating. Please check out Ashish's blog. I have it here at the top. We'll include it in the notes, but it's https :// that is ASHISHB.net. So ashishb.net. You can find his work there. Ashish, thank you for joining the show today. We appreciate your time, your insights, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, Alex.